Well, I hope you've had a good week, and welcome to the homeostasis unit. The outlines here will give you an idea of what our lesson goals and our supporting knowledge, but I wanted to highlight a couple things for you here as we start this unit. And first of all, this big idea that life depends on the ability to monitor and adjust to both internal and external fluctuations in the environment. And that's going to be part of your long answer question when we get to the unit test. So really make sure that you focus on this question. And whether we're talking about a cell or we're talking about the whole organism, from biochemistry, we looked at the cell membrane, we looked at regulating gene expression, and so now we're going to look at more whole body in how we adjust to both internal and external fluctuations in the environment. And so you can look through the outline here, look at the lessons we're going to be covering and what you need to know. I've also included here the learning targets as we go through the unit. We will hit each of those learning targets, and then at the bottom there's a little activity we'll be doing in the lesson where you're going to rank what you think are the most important things. It's the last page here. I was just going to give you a quick mind map to give you an overview for the unit before we continue. And we're going to start, as we look at homeostasis, we're going to start at what's called control systems, or sometimes called feedback loops. And so if you have your outline, if you can just follow through and you can fill this out as we go. But we're going to start in here with control systems. And control systems are also known as feedback loops. Okay, and there's different types of feedback loops, and we'll get into that when we get into the note. But in general, these two types of feedback loops, they're just positive and they are negative. And again, we'll look into that when we get into the note. So we're going to start with that because as we go through and regulate the body, we regulate things through these feedback loops. Now, we're going to look at regulating a number of things. And the first thing that we're going to look at, and you'll look at this tomorrow, is thermoregulation. Okay, and we'll talk about those systems tomorrow. From there, next week when I get back, we're going to start looking at the excretory system. And the excretory system, the main organ there is the kidney. And we're going to try to figure out what the kidney does and how it works. And so we're going to spend a couple days looking at urine production. And those are pretty exciting days. It'll change the way you go to the bathroom forever. So we're going to look at urine production or kidney juice there. And we're going to understand urine production. And then we are going to spend some time looking at, well, how does that play a role in homeostasis? Because that's a critical role of homeostasis, is our kidney function and activity. And one of the key things that regulates our kidneys is a structure that sits just on top of our kidneys, and it's called the adrenal glands. Some of you may have heard of that before, but many students I know haven't. And so our first system we're going to look at is the excretory system. After the excretory system, we are going to focus in on the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is a system of hormones that interact to regulate our body. And so we'll do a number of things here. So from the endocrine system, we're going to look at how do we regulate sugar. And the sugar is actually regulated in part through the adrenal glands, but it's also regulated through the pancreas. And so we'll talk about that, and diabetes is kind of the main issue that comes up there as we look at regulating sugar levels. So we'll look at sugar. After that, we're going to look at a number of other things. We're going to look at regulating metabolism. And we spend a whole unit understanding our metabolism. So how do we regulate this metabolism? And the main organ or structures that are involved there, it's the thyroid. So we'll take a look at your thyroid gland and what it's doing. So we'll regulate sugar, we're going to regulate metabolism, and we're going to regulate calcium. And calcium levels are actually a fairly important aspect that we don't often understand. And calcium is regulated through the thyroid as well. And it's also regulated through what's called the parathyroid. Okay. So after sugar and metabolism, calcium, last thing we're going to look at in the endocrine system, we're going to spend a little bit of time here, and we're going to look at the sex hormones. And within the sex hormones, we're going to look at both male, which isn't too complicated, and we're going to look at the female sex hormones. Okay, and all that is crucial in regulating our body's balance. So we'll focus on the excretory system, the endocrine system, and then the last part of our course, we'll be looking at the nervous system. And so as you come up into the nervous system, we're going to look at specific nerve cells. And there's actually different types of nerve cells, and so we'll talk about those. And we'll talk about how those nerve cells both send and receive messages. Because we can send and receive messages with hormones, but we can also send them with, obviously, our nerve cells. So send and receive messages. Now, within the nervous system, we're not going to spend a lot of time going over the specifics, and it's a very complicated system and a pretty amazing system, but we'll get a general overview of what the divisions of it, the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, and focus on kind of what those roles are. If we have time, we'll maybe look into some parts of the brain. We'll see how we're doing for time. Within the autonomic nervous system, we will focus on two aspects of it, and we're going to focus on what's called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this is a normally a pretty fun unit because we're looking at more whole body, what's happening, what happens when disease interacts with one of these systems, what goes wrong, how do we treat it, and we'll see that everything is interconnected here. And so if you go back to that big idea, is that life fluctuates in a very delicate balance, and we have internal and external mechanisms that will help us regulate that, help us respond to our environment, and help us to live better. So anyway, hope you guys are having a good week, and I'll see you in a few days.